Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, December 3rd, 2013. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Craig is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. Now, on the corporate media right now, we're once again playing the waiting game. You've seen this before. Obama will announce that he will speak on some subject at X, and then he's always 5-10 minutes late to try and build the drama, build the suspense, make sure everybody is hanging on his every word. And he's going to speak about Obamacare again, still. And it's like become this daily mantra coming out of the White House about how well it's really going to be and it's working out just fine and the problems are being fixed. And Jay Carney was out there earlier today saying, we're fixing the problems, and then hold up the few that they've got fixed while hoping you'll forget about all the millions of problems that are still out there. And Obama's basically trying to co-opt the American corporate media to become his sales representatives to sell what he was promoting as his signature accomplishment of his presidency. And it's turned into an absolute disaster. One of the reporters at the White House has gone public over in Russia today saying that the Obama administration is the most hostile administration to journalists in U.S. history. And I understand why, because Obama is dealing with a corporate media which, probably under pressure from the independent media, is finally having to report on some of the negative things that are going on with this government and this nation. And Obama doesn't want that to happen. You're supposed to only say the good things because that's your job. That's what you're paid for in the corporate media. And a lot of the corporate media aren't doing that anymore, like Ben Swan. And this is creating quite a bit of hostility from a White House with a great deal to conceal from the American people. So for those of you in the corporate media who are feeling that hostility, it means you're finally doing your job. Now, a very interesting story came out on CNBC, the Obamacare enrollment error rate still secret as more sign up. And Karl Rove is out there insisting that 100,000 people succeeded in signing up for Obamacare this last month. See, it's really working. Let's see, 100,000 per month against an American population of 330 million will tell you just how wonderfully this is working. But in fact, the number is out, according to one report. 1/3, 30%, 1/3, 33% for the nitpickers out there, of the Americans who have already signed up for Obamacare through the website do not actually have insurance coverage because of the errors in the data coming out the back end of the system. The data going to the insurance carriers themselves is so botched up and defective, they can't figure out what it's supposed to mean or who the insurance is supposed to go through. Data is in the wrong fields. Some of it's just outright garbage. Random noise from some random location in the memory. And there is no mechanism to notify the enrollees that there's a problem unless the insurance carriers start writing letters. These Americans appear to already be set up for the billing and the money part of it, but they don't have coverage, and they don't know it. After January 1, they get sick, they get in an accident, they go to the hospital and say, no problem, I've got Obamacare. They run up $20,000, $30,000 in hospital bills, and the hospital comes back and says, I'm sorry, we can't find that you've got insurance. The lawsuits are going to be flying, the lawyers are going to have a field day, and as always, the government will indemnify itself from fault because, after all, they meant well. More concerns about the security of the Obamacare website. And David Kennedy, who's a security expert, or as they like to call themselves sometimes a white hat hacker, said that there is no security at the Obamacare website. It does not appear to have been designed in, because when you're designing a system that's open to the public, you are thinking about the security of the system all the way through from the very beginning. It's not something that you set it all up and then you go out and buy something on the front end that's going to keep you secure, because it doesn't work. And he says, as far as he can tell, there was no consideration given to security of the personal data that you're putting into the Obamacare website, and that not only is the site wide open to hacking, he says it's a good bet. It's already happened. And he's saying it will take multiple months, possibly over a year, to begin to address some of the critical exposures on the website. This was completely botched. They should have just taken Obamacare and listed it as a product on the Amazon website, and it would have worked. But no, we're going to take $1 billion and throw it on out there, and because that's what the Obamacare website has cost so far, was $600 million to begin with, and now another $400 million in this emergency funding to try and get this thing going. People who are working on this thing, they're raking in the dough left and right, and it continues to be a huge embarrassment for the Obama administration, which is taking the position it works because we say it does, and patriotic Americans will believe the website is working just fine. This is a huge mess, and so they're doing the only thing they can do, come out making more speeches, more presentations, more press conferences that, yes, it's being dealt with. The Republicans, they're just exaggerating the problems. Really, it's not that big a deal. And, yeah, it is. And, Obama, you own this one, and this idea about nobody told me there was a problem, that doesn't really wash. Because it's your job to know the problems. The buck stops here, according to Harry Truman. Of course, according to Obama, it's, nobody ever showed me the buck. I never saw a buck. Did you see a buck? I didn't see a buck. All righty. Now, according to Darrell Issa, the FBI is intentionally impeding the investigation into whether the Internal Revenue Service was deliberately targeting conservative groups. Of course, pretty much the preponderance of evidence is, yeah, they were. And now there's an official investigation, and I understand why it's being stonewalled, because if actual documentary proof surfaces that the IRS was targeting the political enemies of Barack Obama, that is an impeachable offense. And I would not be surprised to see the Israel supporters in the Congress seriously start talking about impeachment of Obama so they can get him out of there, get Biden into the White House, who will go ahead and bomb Iran and everywhere else that Netanyahu wants to have bombed. So it's a real political fistfight right now, and ISA is threatening subpoenas up to and including the FBI director to find out what the heck is going on and why they're engaged in yet another cover-up. Because we know that's the FBI's real job, despite the wonderful reputation they have from film and TV. Their job is covering things up. That's how I got put on this path of being a blogger and a talk show host almost 20 years ago. Next spring will be the 20th anniversary since I got put on this path when I uncovered, quite by accident, evidence that White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster had been murdered and his body dumped in the park to make it look like a suicide. And it was the FBI that was fraudulently manufacturing evidence and testimony to cover up the murder. That's what they do. So forget about all this law enforcement and we get the bad guys. No, their job is to manufacture the case the government wants you to think, whether it was Vincent Foster, Leonard Peltier, James Earl Ray, and it goes on and on and on. All righty. Let's see. We're coming up here on a commercial break. The phone lines are open here. When we come back, apparently war with Syria is now back on the list of to-dos here in the United States of America, and they're getting ready to try and gin up some other excuse they hope will convince you that you should fling your babies onto those Syrian bayonets of the evil Assad. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Syria is apparently on the front burner again. We're getting this story how there is a sealed United Nations report that accuses Syria's Bashar al-Assad of war crimes. There are no specifics. Needless to say, there is no evidence being presented. Now, the United Nations has commented before that war crimes are occurring in this covert attempt at overthrow being described as a civil war in Syria. But now the announcement is that there is a sealed report available only to an official investigation, that places the blame for the war crimes directly on Bashar al-Assad. This is their third try to come up with a reason to sell you a war with Syria. The first one was chemical weapons against his own people, and that didn't fly. Then they tried a trial balloon about, well, the Russian deal didn't get rid of his biological weapons, and frankly, nobody paid attention to that one. And so now we know he did war crimes. The evidence is secret to protect our sources, but you can trust us to assure you he's a bad guy and we should go kill him. So here we go again. One more time. Chemical weapons didn't fly. Biological weapons didn't fly. So now they've got secret evidence Assad did really bad things, which is a registered trademark of the White House, to try and reignite popular support for yet another war in yet another country that refuses to run their nation the way the private central bankers want it run, meaning for their own profit. And there's almost a touch of arrogance out there. And I understand the money junkies are desperate for the war. They see it as their own possible salvation out of this mess they've made. But it amazes me that they put out these pieces of propaganda and still apparently labor under the delusion that the majority of the American people are still trusting and naive and will believe this stuff. Even after that slap in the face of the chemical weapons accusation, that huge backlash. Meanwhile, the Syrian army, which is continuing to regain territory in Syria from the hired foreign mercenaries, has captured yet another cache of Israeli-made weapons. So that's one of the sources of the weapons pouring into Syria in this covert attempt at overthrowing Assad. They're coming up from Israel. Now, a lot of people are talking about this whole thing all of a sudden where we have companies like Domino's Pizza and Amazon they're going to use drones to deliver things. The happy drones will be flying across the sky, delivering pizzas and books and what all else. And there was an article over at Wired saying that even if the federal government allows the drones to fly, it's still nonsense. And they're absolutely right. These drones are not cost effective. It still takes a human operator to fly them, who's got to be more highly trained than somebody who's just driving his car to deliver a pizza or whatever. The drones are not built for endurance and durability. They're used for a few minutes and put away until you need them again. Not 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day or 16 hours a day flying across the sky carrying pepperoni. It's a PR stunt. And I think what's going on is, this is PR not just for Amazon and not for Domino's. I think it's for the U.S. government. They're going to start getting these companies to put drones in the sky, serving these very benign purposes of bringing pizzas and books and medication and what all else to people who otherwise would not get it, as if we are all not living in urban areas with convenient postal delivery and so forth. And they're going to put these up there and say, see, drones are your friend. You shouldn't be upset about drones. These drones are doing useful, necessary things. To try and calm down the public outrage over drones overhead peeking in our windows and potentially carrying weapons. We might even see the government start to paint their drones in corporate logos so we don't realize they're government drones peeking in our windows and spying on us in complete defiance of the Fourth Amendment. And I think that's what's really going on, because this idea of using drones for delivery, it's not going to work. It's not practical. So there's something else going on. And I think it's basically, this is a PR stunt to sell all of America that drones are okay, drones are cool, nothing to worry about when you see a drone overhead. It's probably, somebody's dry cleaning on the way home. And it isn't. They're trying to sell you that drones are good. And we know from people in places like Pakistan and Yemen and Gaza that drones are not good, and drones are not your friends. Now, a lot of people still talking about that New York train derailment. A little bit of an update on that. Apparently, the data recorders on the trains have data recorders the same that aircraft do, and now all the new cars do. If you weren't aware of that, New cars now have data recorders that record information in the event of a crash. How fast you were going, how hard the brakes were being hit, G-forces experienced, and so forth. And apparently this train was traveling 82 miles per hour as it went into an area of the track that was a 30-mile-per-hour zone. Now, this is more than just obeying the speed signs. Many years ago, when my wife and I were still hiding out, for lack of a better word, in Washington State, we volunteered at a railroad museum up there. We even produced a documentary for them as a fundraiser. And if you're not already aware of it, railroad tracks are rated for speed and weight that they will sustain. And trains have to comply with that. If a track is going to support a heavier train at faster rates of speed, it has to be built stronger. Obviously makes sense. And as tracks age, they'll be decertified. And maximum speed and maximum weight will be brought down. So it's more than just a question of 30-mile-per-hour sign on the side that the engineer was ignoring. If you're taking that train into a stretch of track that is built for 30-mile-per-hour travel at 82 miles per hour, this is, unless there was a mechanical fault with the locomotive that just let it speed out of control, this is definitely the engineer. Definitely the engineer's issue. So, more about that later. Now, turning over to the war zones, and I emphasize the plural, still going back and forth over this idea about the United States leaving Afghanistan. Now, remember, we have been told by President Obama that he was going to bring our kids home from Afghanistan as soon as he was elected. That turned out to be a lie. Then they were saying end of 2014, end of next year. Now they're trying to sort of hem and haw and fudge about that one. And they're going back and forth with this so-called security agreement with Hamid Karzai. And the United States wants him to sign it right now as his last act before leaving office. And Hamid Karzai says, no, yeah, he's going to put it on to the next administration. And he's right in that, because such a long-range, far-reaching agreement with the United States ought to be decided by the government that's going to have to live with the consequences, not from the guy who's heading into retirement. And so there's a lot of pressure on there trying to get this deal going, trying to clarify some way to keep American forces inside Afghanistan in control of the opium, in control of the oil pipeline rights of way. And even after the official pullout, there will still be a U.S. presence, including the Central Intelligence Agency, to keep an eye and make sure that the new puppet regime of Afghanistan does what they're supposed to do. Now, speaking of CIA and of various other nefarious aspects of the U.S. government, the European Court of Human Rights is hearing a case brought by two terror suspects who were tortured by the CIA, and this case has blown the lid off the existence of yet another secret U.S. torture center, this one in Poland. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. I just got an email from a listener saying that following my suggestion of having put Obamacare on the Amazon website as a product, Amazon could then use their drones to deliver pills and bandages to your doorstep when you needed them. We're getting into an absurd territory here, and that, of course, is the best way to show just how absurd the whole concept was. And Obamacare has got nothing to do with the health of the American people. It's another cash grab by a government that has borrowed itself into an unpayable black hole of debt by selling us all into the slavery of a private central bank issuing the public currencies alone at interest for the last 100 years. If this government really cared about your health, they'd be doing something about the 400,000 Americans every year who die from medical mistakes. They'd be doing something about labeling, if not banning, GMO food. They'd be doing something about the toxic adjuvants in vaccines and in processed commercial food. They'd do something about the SSRIs, which in a susceptible and large segment of the population can trip off violent and suicidal behavior. But they're not doing any of that, because all those things make money. And that's what Obamacare is supposed to do, make money. People are sending in their money through the website. A third of them don't even have insurance and don't even know it. All right, so getting back to this whole situation, there's this case going before the European Court of Human Rights where these two terror suspects, now remember, these guys have never been convicted of actually being terrorists. They were suspects. and they were tortured to extract a confession, which is absolutely worthless in any civilized court of law. And then why this case is newsworthy is because it blew the lid off yet another secret U.S. torture center, this one in Poland. Now, what's complicating some of these lawsuits being brought by these prisoners for human rights violations is the fact that much of the evidence has been destroyed by the CIA. And the tapes were destroyed by the head of CIA's counterterrorism center, Jose Rodriguez. Now, he was interviewed for Newsnight over at BBC, and he defended the destruction of the tapes by saying there's nothing on them because waterboarding isn't torture. That's the official U.S. government excuse, that all these things that they do to these people, which we've seen in the photos from Abu Ghraib, they're not really torture. I'm willing to wager a plugged Turkish piastre that if Jose Rodriguez got strapped to a waterboard for a few weeks, it might change his opinion on that. Of course it's torture. The Inquisition used it as torture. The Nazis used it as torture. The U.S. was using it as torture in Vietnam. Yes, it's torture. The United States government is using torture to coerce confessions out of accused suspects so that they can wave them around and say, see, we caught a real terrorist. There are real terrorists out here. TSA has to go on groping you at the airports and searching your parked cars. And by the way, apparently that latter program is due for another expansion. In order to justify increases in budgets and more money and more fun at the expense of everybody else, including our tourism industry, they're now expanding the program of randomly breaking into and searching cars parked in the airport parking lot. Good reason to take a taxi or have somebody drop you off at the airport. The idea that somebody would have something in a car is ridiculous. They're not taking it onto the airplane. They're not taking it to the passenger terminal. Yeah, they might blow up a few cars in the parking lot. That's not really going to make much of a point to anybody. And it really is not effective unless they're opening and going into every single car. If they're just randomly checking, play the odds on that one. Next, it's going to be these giant X-ray machines like they have at the border to scan trucks coming in for illegal cargo and drugs. And the fact that all of this radiation is causing cancer demonstrably, small price to pay to keep the TSA's budget going. Remember when Janet Napolitano refused to go through a body scanner herself as part of a press conference? And they said, show us it's safe. Go on and through it. Somebody published some photos. We had them at whatreallyhappened.com a few days ago, documenting that contrary to the propaganda being put out about these sub-millimeter radio wave scanners, they do in fact penetrate your body and see inside the body. And we know that there have been peer-reviewed studies coming out of MIT, out of Johns Hopkins, that say these very tiny radio waves are in fact causing DNA damage through a newly realized principle called molecular resonance. Same phenomenon that brought down the Gallipoli Bridge at the Tacoma Narrows, Washington, just taken down to a microscopic scale. Remember, this is the government that was telling all the shoe stores that those shoe fluoroscopes were wonderful and everybody should use them until all the shoe store operators started dying of cancer. This government doesn't care about your health. When the government sees the people as the wealth of the nation, they'll take care of you because you're an asset. But when you have a government that sees the people as a source of wealth only, they don't care. They'll be nice to the people giving them money, and everybody else can take a flying leap, and that's really what's going on. Now, there's an important court case coming up. There's a number of these cases, but this is the first one that's actually going to get heard in a federal court. And it involves this Stanford doctoral student, Rahina Ibrahim. She's a Stanford University doctoral student in architecture, and she was getting on a plane to Hawaii from San Francisco, inside the United States. And she was kept off the plane because she had been put on the no-fly list. And there doesn't seem to have been a reason for anybody to do it. They just did. And the way that no-fly list is set up, once you're on it, you can't get off. There's no mechanism to go in there and say, hey, I'm not, I shouldn't be on this list. I'm studying architecture. This woman's from Malaysia. And yes, she's Muslim. But we seem to live in an age where government is punishing innocent people and calling it security. I call it persecution. Like when the Nazis refused to allow certain people to travel purely on the basis of their name. And that's where we are right now. They can't find the guilty. So they're maintaining their authority and their fear by punishing the innocent. And that's exactly what they're doing. This woman was not a threat. It's like that poor woman in Canada, 50 years old, author, was on her way from Canada down to Miami to catch a cruise ship for a Caribbean Christmas cruise arranged for her by the March of Dimes. And the Department of Homeland Security stops her at the border because she suffered from depression? That's not a crime. And in these difficult, hard economic times, a lot of people are dealing with depression, and all of a sudden that's a reason to not be allowed to travel? We only want cheerful people here in the United States of America. You're in violation of the Cheerful Noises Act. We sentence you to be hanged by the neck until you cheer up, to paraphrase Monty Python. And it gets even more absurd. This is reported over in Mercury News. Up in Oakland, there was a woman with a service dog. You know what a service dog is? They help the blind. They help people who are limited in mobility. This particular dog is trained to detect when the woman might be going into a seizure so that the woman knows to take her medication. 34-year-old woman, and she was kicked off the airplane because her service dog happens to be a bull terrier. And somebody on the flight said, oh, bull terrier, we don't want that. And they kicked her off. If you are going to fly with us, you will have a poodle. Only poodles are allowed on the airplane. And they're doing all of this stuff to mask a very stark reality. They still can't stop hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens coming across the border from Mexico, many of whom are carrying illegal drugs and illegal weapons, and many of whom are violent criminals fleeing prosecution, many of whom are carrying highly contagious diseases. Can't do a thing about that. Didn't do a thing about the Boston bombing. But unless they want to lose their budget, they have to go out there and parade their authority by smacking around perfectly innocent, helpless people and wrecking their lives gratuitously. And that is not what America is supposed to be, by any reasonable definition of what this nation was designed to be by the Founding Fathers. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call. Dan in Canada. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Michael. I've been listening to your show for the past few months, and you're driving me crazy because I was saying to your operator there that you make so much sense, and it drives me nuts because I don't understand why the American people vote 96% of these scoundrels back into power who are screwing the public, year
Well, you're presuming that we have honest and fair elections, and I think that's a mistake.
Well, actually, I've thought about it, and I've realized that anybody with two brain cells would have voted guys like McCain, Feinstein, Boxer, whoever these guys are, out long ago, and have realized or woken up and realized that the country's been hijacked. So I've been almost thinking like, yeah, it has been hijacked, and there's no way you guys are that dumb, which I think you guys are very intelligent people. And
we tried as hard as we could to get Ron Paul in, both in 2008 and 2012, and the lengths that the established political powers went to make sure that nobody got in there to spoil their little party were obvious for everybody to see. If you're not familiar with it already, there's a wonderful website called blackboxvoting.org. It's run by a wonderful lady named Bev Harris. We've had her on the show before. And she's also featured quite prominently in the HBO documentary Hacking Democracy, which looks at this issue of how easy it is for American elections to be absolutely manipulated, and it's very obvious the system has been set up to make it easy and untraceable to change the outcome of elections. All of these electronic voting machines are wide open to fraud. There's no security. There's no auditing. They are intentionally designed so that people who know how can get in there, change the outcome of an election, and escape without detection. And it's a huge, huge problem. And if you have not seen that documentary, Hacking Democracy, you need to see it. And visit blackboxvoting.org. But yeah, the elections in this country are an absolute farce.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of determined that in the last few elections, because you see guys like McCain, and you realize what a warmonger he is. He's been in there for like forever. Like, I'm 45 years old, and I think he's been in there for like, close to 40 years. And it's a joke. Like, how does that guy stay in power? And it's obvious there's something going on. So what's going to change? So let me ask you, I know you probably want to get into other callers and other things, but what's it going to take to change and get your country back on track? Because I have to be concerned about it, because let's face it, you guys are the leaders of the free world. You have the most military power, and you've been a great country in the past. So, I mean, like the old saying goes, I mean, when you guys, I don't know the expression, but you guys get a cold and we get the flu or something like that in Canada or whatever.
When we get the cold, everybody sneezes. Well, it's already happening up there in Canada. What happened here to the United States of America, and that was we have politicians who are more loyal to the government of Israel than they are to the United States of America. Certainly for the McCains, it's a family tradition, because John McCain's father was a U.S. Navy admiral who was basically the person in charge of covering up the truth about Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And, of course, very much hand in glove with Israel. And there are people in our power structure who say, all right, Israel's hijacked the country. All right, fine, so I'll play ball with them because I like the fancy office and the wealth and the perks and the privilege and everything. And they seem to have absolutely no problem with running the nation and their constituencies for the benefit of a foreign power. And it's hardly new in history to see people like that. That's what got Charles I in trouble with the British people, was being all cozy with the Scots against the interest of the British subjects. So, that's basically what's going on. How we will break free, and of course I do not advocate violence and revolution, because the U.S. government is already prepared to deal with that. And I know it's very hard to do in the current economy, but I counsel patience, because the system is coming apart at the seams. And I really do see the United States going the same way as the former Soviet Union. It's going to fall apart and collapse, and we, the American people, need to be ready to retake control of our country, kick out the money junkies the same way the new Russian republics did, get rid of private central banking in favor of a state central bank and non-interest-bearing currency, and basically go back to the model of government we had under the original Constitution, where the power is diffused across the country and resides primarily with the people, with the government's job to obey orders, not to issue them. And there's a few other wrinkles I'm putting in there to the blueprint for the new America, which is that any members of Congress who are going to, or whatever we're going to call it in the new nation, if they're going to vote for war, they have to put their own children on the front lines as a deterrent.
I hear you, brother. And I once won a trip to Washington D.C. through work. It was a sales contest, and they did a tour of the Capitol building, and it was so amazing, because I actually went in Joe Biden's office when he was a senator still, and this was before Obama and so forth. And it was amazing. You saw nothing but lily white guys in their fancy $1,000 suits power broking, because it took the tunnel from his office, which goes underneath the street, to the Capitol building. Yeah. And you see these guys in their fancy suits. And the other thing I want to tell you too, and I think most people were like me, I was a God-fearing Christian that believes we should support Israel, because that's what we've been told, and Jesus was a Jew and the whole bit. And it only changed when I started to look into it, and I had never understood what's a Palestinian refugee? Why is there refugees? Why are they suicide bombing? What's an occupied territory? And I finally realized what the hell's going on, and I'm absolutely disgusted. And then you talk to the majority of people, and they have no idea. They're like, oh, of course we've got to support Israel. support a bunch of occupiers who took other people's land?
Well, you know what's really the irony about that? The historical Jesus, Yeshua, which is actually Joshua, not Jesus. There was a mistranslation going from Aramaic to Greek. But he may have been Jewish by religion, but by ethnicity, he was Palestinian, because that's what lived in that area at the time. And the majority of the people following the Jewish faith living in Israel now, they're actually descended from Central Asians. And they're not the genetic inheritors of the Holy Land. But it makes for great propaganda, and Israel has been very successful in co-opting America's Christian community to try and convince America that present-day Israel is exactly the same as the biblical Israel, and that's why you all have to support Israel if you ever want to get into heaven.
So let me ask you this. If, for example, there was a revolt, they're going to use the United States Constitution on you and say, well, how can you take the media back? We own the media, and you know what I mean? They're going to use the rights or the Constitution against you to assert their rights. So
well, obviously, in the event of a collapse, you know, there's going to be a transition period during which nobody's going to be playing by the rules. And the Constitution has not stopped the government from nationalizing assets before. You know, and it's almost a cycle. They go privatization until they see how bad it is, and then they start nationalizing and pulling back. And it's this constant fight between the haves and have-not, the fascists and the socialists, and that basically delineates all of historical conflict ever since money was actually invented. But at this point, barring an outright revolution, and I discourage that, I think the collapse is inevitable. There's really no way around it. We better start planning on how we're going to deal with it now, because there will be no end of carpetbaggers, well-funded by the money junkies, coming on in and saying, we got a brand new government all set for you, got a brand new private central bank, just saying your name here, and we'll just get the whole scam going all over again. And we need to grab those carpetbaggers, give them a good, thick coat of tar and feathers, run them out of town on a rail.
Exactly. Well, I wish you luck, and you know, God help us, and that we, you know, it all turns out, because, you know, we need to, because the way things are going, it's freaking scary.
It is, but you got to take a very close look at your own home up in Canada, because the Israel firsters in Canada are starting to turn Canada into the same Israel slave that has happened to here in the United States of America. Please learn from our mistakes and stop it while you still can.
I see it too. I totally see, like Harper, for example. He was at a fundraiser for the Israeli, whatever, equivalent of AIPAC up here, and he was declaring his unwavering support for Israel, and they named a bird sanctuary after him, and he's a total kiss-ass, you know, whatever, lover, and yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. And no, it's in Canada too.
A bird sanctuary. Okay. All right. Well, listen, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and some news, and we'll be back for hour number 2 of our show after these words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go to the phones. George, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I know there's this fast food strike coming on because they say they're not in at Walmart, and they say because they're not paying the employees enough. And the thing is, I know one franchise owner my ex works for. She's part of management. And the thing is, when Obamacare kicked in last year, where they say where the employees' hours had to be cut and all that, you know, and the thing is, it's so costly, and it's not just that; it's the government regulation that costs. He said he wants to pay people more, but you got all this government regulation, and now since the ban of trans fat, now the oil they want them to use is more expensive than the trans fat. I mean, it's just so expensive to do business. I wish people would realize that.
Well, we know that in the United States, the standards for food served by restaurants are actually a little lower than what is in the supermarkets, and it's something people ought to think about when they're wondering how these fast food companies are making their price points. And I know there's a lot of debates about whether this or that is good for you or bad for you, and we've gone through a lot of embarrassments where somebody will say this is bad for you, and then we find out down the road, no, it really wasn't. It was just being accused of being bad by somebody who wanted to sell a competing product. But the reality is, for whatever reason, workers, as a general rule, not just fast food, not just Walmart, workers are not being paid enough to be able to pay all these increasing demands on them coming from corporations and the government. And for an economy to work, to be healthy, The currency has to be flowing freely at all levels and into all necessary sectors of the economy. And right now the system is set up to just grab it all and pile it up all over Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. And that is a system which is doomed to collapse at some point. In fact, I think probably most of the insiders realize a collapse is now inevitable, which is why they're sort of accelerating their grabbing, as much as they can to themselves before they have to skedaddle. And again, I'm not a very strong pro-union person. Unions were the bane of my existence while I was working in Hollywood. But at this point, they're necessary because you cannot have a nation where all the wealth is concentrated on the top and people are being told that they have to work a 40 or 60-hour work week and then go on to food programs to be able to eat. That's just nonsense. And the reality is that the wages and salaries being paid to these people are a very tiny part of these corporations' overhead. And when you look at the money they're spending on corporate perks, corporate salaries, and the rest of that, you begin to realize it's an attitude problem. It's not an economic problem. Go ahead.
One thing I noticed in corporate America, if a CEO or the board of directors does a terrible job and gives the company a big fat loss, they get a golden parachute. But if I accidentally cuss at a customer, I don't get that golden parachute. No,
you absolutely don't. And it's a set of double standards where there's one set of rules for the haves and another completely different set of rules for the have-nots. And it's reached an absolutely absurd degree of instability. And again, we need to incentivize achievement and accomplishment. I mean, I'm not a socialist. I don't think everybody ought to be making exactly the same amount of money. But at the same time, for the economy to be healthy, especially when you have a government and businesses trying to extract wealth from the population, somebody somewhere has to take responsibility for making sure that population can transform their labor into that money, from there to go into various corporations, retail, and the ever-escalating taxes and fees that the government is putting on us. Our government has lost the overview. Everybody's thinking grab, 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 grab. Nobody's thinking, how do we make sure that people have something we can grab from them? George, are you there? Okay.
Yeah, but like this franchise I'm talking about is McDonald's. And,
yes.
And Daniel, his first name is Daniel, but he, like I say, he said he would love to pay his workers more, but it's just his government regulations, these mandates, or it's just like a ball and chain around his legs. His hands are tied.
Well, the store managers don't. It's not up to the store managers. You're in a franchise arrangement, and your wages and salaries are set by corporate policy and whatever local minimum wage laws there are. And from the point of view of the top of the McDonald's corporation, yeah, they want to cut costs everywhere because they're all about profit. If you go back and you look at the guy who really turned McDonald's into a nationwide franchise opera success, Ray Kroc, I think his name was, and he used to have a motto on his wall: if I see my competitor in the water drowning, I'm going to shove a fire hose down his throat and turn it on full blast. That was his attitude. And that was the attitude that let him take this little tiny McDonald's restaurant that he found and just turn it into this huge franchise. And we can admire his success, but again, success ought to be tempered with other considerations. I've got no problem with people making money, okay? And I have no problem with people wanting a prosperous economy. But you've got to balance it with other priorities and necessities to keep the society and the economy as a whole, healthy and functioning. And right now we're not. We're seeing greed operating as the top and sole priority of our culture, and it's destroyed all that used to be good about the American spirit. All anybody thinks about is getting more of those pieces of paper with ink on them to pay the bills, to the point where we have governments around the world that are trapped in this private central banking recession where they're out there saying to women, yeah, go on and be a prostitute. That's good money. If you step back and look at it, really, is that the relationship between government and population, where the government's going to go out and essentially be a pimp and say to women, you go out and be a prostitute, and if you refuse, you don't get unemployment?
Well, I've been hearing rumblings from the Texas state government, but Texas is getting ready to operate independently. Maybe not necessarily secession, but start to operate independently.
Well, if they're going to operate independently, they're going to have to talk about secession, because this federal government right now does not tolerate any independence at the state level. We've seen that time and time again. where the federal government really has broken free of its constitutional limits, and they're basically acting on the principle of federal supremacy over the states. And anybody who wants to do things their own way, they're going to come under attack, covert financial public relations attack from the federal government to try and shut them down. And again, what I see as the ultimate outcome of the trends that we're looking at right now is we're going to see the financial system implode, and it will take the federal government with it, and we, the American people, need to be prepared and poised to stand up and say, okay, we're going to decide what this nation will be. We're the ones who are expected to clean up the mess and clean up the ashes and put it all back together, and because of that, it is ours to decide what direction we will go.
Well, I sat there, listened on Russia Today. They had one reporter on. I said, if your United States government collapses, I said they got to still pay that derivative debt. I'm like, no, we don't. And and one guy said there goes, no, we don't. I said that derivatives is not really a debt. It's just useless paper. They're trying to have money back it up.
Well, there's a couple of different dimensions on that, and I may have to take you into the next commercial break. Now, technically, the derivatives debt is all private by the bankers and the Wall Street financial firms. But the U.S. government has already passed a law saying that derivatives losses will be transferred to the American people. Just to show you how completely fascistic we've gone here. But if the banking system and the government collapses, the foreign holders of those derivatives debt will not be able to enforce that because of the principle of odious debt in international law, which says that the citizens of a country are responsible for debts incurred to take care of the nation. If the government borrows money to build roads and schools and so forth, yeah, we're on the hook for that debt, and we ought to be. But when the government borrows money to wage war, when it borrows money to spy on us all, when it borrows money to prop up the banks or prop up Israel, that is all odious debt, and we are not responsible for it, nor are we obliged to honor these bills of collateral that for all of our public lands that the U.S. government has been handing out to secure more loans from foreign governments and foreign banks, because we never agreed to it, and it really isn't legal under the Constitution for the government to take our public property lands and use them for financial purposes. Got to take a break. George, stay with me. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are loading up, so let's try and get through some phone calls here real quick. We're talking with George, and George, we're talking about where the United States is headed, and the Americans need to start asking a couple of questions. And the first and foremost is, how much of all this debt are they really morally responsible for? Because we know the government will pass all kinds of laws saying it's yours to deal with. We borrowed it. You got to pay it back. That's just the way it's supposed to be. And that, of course, is slavery. We know the international principle of odious debt says that the American people are not, in fact, responsible for all of the government borrowing. In particular, the government borrowing that was used to fund wars of conquest, the installation of surveillance systems with which to politically repress us, money borrowed to prop up the banks, money borrowed to prop up Israel. We're not really responsible for that under the principle of odious debt, and we're not morally responsible for it. The deal is we give our money to the government spends that money to take care of us, not a foreign nation, not a bunch of bankers in Wall Street who should have known better than to do what they did back in 2008, to take care of us. And they're failing on that regard. Just take a look around at the crumbling infrastructure of the nation. Your money is going away, and very little of it is coming back. And the entire economy and society is hideously out of balance. There has to be a balance between different competing agendas. That's the way the nation was originally set up, with the government as the arbiter between the greed of the rich and the needs of the general population. To balance between the two. Our government, sadly, has been completely co-opted. It's gone totally over to the money junkie side, and that is fascism. Anything else, George?
Yeah, I'd like to know, you think you can get Karen Hughes on as a guest one of these days?
Yeah, I'll try and get her on. I'm trying to get some guests lined up, for the show now that we're doing this again.
Because I'm interested in the question you might have to ask her, because she's a World Bank whistleblower, and some of the stuff she has to say is pretty interesting.
Some of it is. I've looked at some of her stuff here. And again, I'm going to let you go here. I'm getting ready to put together another article that is a simplified version of All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, because next month we're going to be back into this debate over raising the government debt. And it's time for Americans to stand up and ask why that debt exists at all. because the Constitution of the United States of America authorizes the government to issue a debt-free public currency as a public utility for the benefit of the public. And it's time to ask why, for the last 100 years, has the government gone to a private central bank to borrow the currency at interest? You will never hear anybody in the corporate media ask that question. You will never see anybody in the government answer that question, because the only answer is 100 years ago the bankers bought enough members of Congress and the President to get the Federal Reserve Act passed through. And by the way, that Federal Reserve Act is itself unconstitutional, because the Constitution vests the money creation authority with the United States government. That cannot be changed without a constitutional amendment. But it seems they'd had a little bit of trouble with the amendment they had just gotten through before, and they decided not to bother trying twice in a row. And that's what's going on. All right, Steve in Florida, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind? Steve in Florida.
Glad that you're back. I'm sorry?
Yeah, no, what's on your mind? You're on the air.
Oh, yeah, I'm real glad that you're back. I really missed you.
Thank you.
I liked your little remark there about the that woman. Her sentence is hung by the neck until she cheers up. That was pretty good.
Well, that's an old Monty Python routine.
Oh, okay. Hey, the reason I called is, I've been getting the reports from just about what's going on in the Ukraine, and I really can't make heads or tails of it. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was going to talk about it a little bit further in the show here. It feels to me like it's a covert attempt to overthrow the existing government. And by the way, that government just survived a no-confidence vote. And what it all comes down to is the European Union approached the Ukraine about coming on board the European Union, and the deal was moving along, and then the Ukrainian government started looking at what was going on to the nations already in the European Union, in particular Greece, and realizing that that's European Central Bank, which loans all the euros at interest, was the problem. And so the Ukrainian government backed out of the deal. Then all of a sudden we're seeing all this funding coming in for all these groups to try and, overthrow the Ukrainian government and get the Ukraine into the European Union. So I see it as the latest chapter in the book of All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. And I'm not the only one who's seeing that. Putin's come out and said this is very obviously an organized operation. It is not a spontaneous grassroots reaction. The people who are behind all of these acts of violence, they're obviously well-funded, they're well-organized. It's an operation is what's going on.
Sure. And RT just today did a piece on Iceland, where Iceland, I guess, is forgiving all mortgages.
They're not forgiving all mortgages, but they're writing off all the mortgage debt that was arrived at through fraud from that whole mortgage-backed security thing. Yeah, well, it's not odious debt. They're basically saying this debt is not legitimate because it was created through fraud, which is very much, a legal principle in most of the nations on Earth. It's only when you start talking to the money junkies like Christine Lagarde who say, we don't care if the debt was arrived at through fraud, you still have to pay it, which is what they've been saying to the people of Greece.
Right.
Okay?
Okie doke. Well, hey, Mike, thank you very much, and it's good to see you back.
Well, thank you very much here. And again, with what's going on over in Iceland, and you're not going to see a lot of this. In fact, you won't see any of it on the American media. When the 2008 banking meltdown happened, and there's a wonderful documentary about it called Inside Job, that if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. Basically, what happened. This still, Steve, thanks a lot. We're gonna let you go here. When that all happened, Iceland arrested their bankers, ultimately threw a lot of them in jail for committing criminal fraud. The people of Iceland kicked out the government that helped the banks loot the people. Got a new government in there, and the new government promised that at some point they were going to start writing off all this mortgage debt that had been heaped onto the people of Iceland through fraud and corruption, and now they've kept that promise. And, of course, the money junkies around the world are screaming and tearing their hair out and tearing their clothes and say, oh, this can't be allowed. but it worked for the people of Iceland. And it would work here. But starting in 2008, the federal government adopted a policy that the Wall Street bankers who were behind that whole mortgage-backed security fraud were never going to be investigated, never going to be arrested, never going to be prosecuted. They were going to solve the problem by taking all the losses caused by the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud and make the American people pay for it. And that's exactly what they've done. And that's why this nation is homeless and starving in record numbers. We had to save the banks because in the mind of the U.S. federal government, banks are far more important than flesh and blood. Flesh and blood, we have too much of that already, but the banks, look how big and shiny and wet they are. We've got to take care of the bank. All hail the banks. Which is why so many of them actually look like churches, if you think about it. That's not a coincidence here. All right, Robert in Missouri. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Probably going to have to take you through the commercial break.
Hey, Mike. I was listening to the guy talk about the McDonald's Corporation and the rest of it. Until the teabagger, pseudo-conservatives wake up to this just gangster corporate model, it's going to keep going this way.
Okay, Robert, hold that thought. We have to take the commercial break. I'm going to come right back to you as soon as these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking with Robert in Missouri. And, Robert, before I let you take back onto the microphone, I want to basically put a concept out there for people to think about. Having a lot of money, and I fondly remember way back when I had a little bit of it, money brings pleasure. And like anything else that brings pleasure, it can become addictive. In fact, going back to that wonderful documentary Inside Job, there was a portion in there where they said scientists actually wired up the brains of Wall Street traders and found out that when they did a big score, when they made a huge pile of numbers on their computer screen, the part of the brain that lit up is exactly the same part of the brain that lights up when they're doing cocaine. And cocaine use on Wall Street is rampant. That's why we call them money junkies. It's not just a joke. These are people who are suffering a serious mental illness, money addiction. And we know when we look at people who are addicted to cocaine or meth or alcohol or whatever, painkillers, OxyContin, we recognize their behavior is addicting, and we see that it is destructive of the society around them. But for some reason, our society has a blindness to the problem of money addiction, mostly because the money addicts themselves don't appear to be in any kind of a problem. They're not worn down and sweaty like we associate with heroin addicts or something like that. We don't see on they're wearing $1,000 suits, they've got all the jewelry, they've got all the cars and stuff. It looks like what they're doing is working, and it is for them. But look what it's doing to our entire culture and the heavy costs we are all paying to feed the money junkies' addiction. And that's where that whole corporate bandit mindset comes in. They're all thinking, I want more money, I want more money. Look at all these bankers who, even though their banks are in serious trouble, they still get those huge end-of-the-year bonuses. That's all they're thinking about. The bonuses, and they nudge, wink each other and say, we're all going to get bonuses, so no one of us looks like a bad guy, and they don't realize they all look like bad guys. But that's the problem. Everybody's thinking about grabbing wealth to themselves, and nobody is maintaining that overview of how to keep the entire economy working to feed that wealth into the system. And that's supposed to be the federal government's job. We expect Wall Street bankers to act like Wall Street bankers. They haven't changed in hundreds of years. They're not going to change now. But the government's job is to strike that balance between the desires of the rich and what is best for the society as a whole. And the federal government has obviously failed in that task. Robert, you had another comment you wanted to add in.
Yeah, and like your fake Republican right, they go around using terms like Islamo-fascists for the Iranians, which is the biggest joke of a term that I've ever heard. But then they overlook the fact that the Adelsons, Koch brothers, and all these guys funding the Tea Party and some of this other stuff on the right, they lionize Ted Cruz, his wife's at Goldman Sachs high up. you know, they lionize all these people like as like they're great politicians, and it's like they don't even do any research into who they are and what their connections are. And the Republicans have sold out the American people so many times.
And so have the Democrats. And so have the Democrats. And let's not.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't even mention the Democrats. They're so far gone for so many decades now that, I mean, they're not even, since JFK was taken out of the picture, that's just Karl Marx land over there. But they still got to take the fascist and bankster money to stay afloat in the Democratic Party. That's what's so hilarious. They talk to progressive game, but then who they get their money from, it's the same gang that gives their money to Republicans. But
that's exactly right.
Yeah, and that's what's so pathetic about the Democrats. It's like they talk out one side of their mouth and they're taking all this money from Goldman Sachs and all the big corporations, the military-industrial contractors, and all the rest of it. They're all involved in this just cesspool of corruption, treason, and tyranny. But the thing is, I wanted to say this: these people in the Tea Party, they demonize Islam all day long. They lionize Israel all day long, and they can't even see the fact that Israel and the Wahhabis are the ones attacking Syria and Iran. I mean, this is just so sick. This is. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's jingoism. It's basically people, you know, and unfortunately, this is tragically still true here in the United States of America, that a large portion of the American people, I think they're a minority, but there's still 30 to 40% of the American population, want to reassure themselves they know what's going on in the world, but they are too lazy or possibly too afraid to go out and find out what's really going on, so they gratefully accept whatever propaganda or message is coming from the TV or the pulpit or the politician's platform and say, okay, yeah, this is reality, and they join and they get that group identity and say, yes, this is where we hate the Muslims and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And they don't really understand how they are being manipulated and maneuvered. And you're absolutely right. Behind all the scenes, it's the same people, the same huge, vast pools of money that are buying and controlling both sides and just putting up one distraction after the other to keep us all marching in the direction of surrendering our wealth and our children's lives to the greater glory of big piles of money. In a lot of ways, our world is completely controlled by aggregated money. I know it's a common wisdom to say bankers are ruling the world, and to an extent that's certainly very much true. What we don't realize is the bankers are themselves ruled by the money system, and more recently by the computers that run the money system. And I know science fiction writers used to talk about computers taking over the world. Newsflash, it's already happened. And unlike Vicky, which tried to take over the world in the Will Smith version of I, Robot, out of benign desires to protect humanity, these financial center computers are only about running up bigger numbers on the bottom of those computerized ledger sheets, and there are no other priorities. And it skews the operation of the financial system, and the financial system rules pretty much the rest of the world. And it's careening completely out of control. And even those big, well-paid executives at these financial corporations, they're not really in as control of the system as they like to pretend that they are to justify their paychecks. They have to go along with where the system itself is going. If they try and deviate or stop, they're immediately replaced. Robert, are you there? I guess we lost him. We're going to switch over to Malcolm in Texas. Malcolm, thank you very much for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Aloha, Mike. Just want to say glad that you're back, and to celebrate you coming back, I did my Christmas shopping at the WhatReallyHappened.com site.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, I bought a $50 coffee mug. Made me think of the Pentagon. I bought $150 worth of T-shirts. I'm sure they're going to go well with the my friends at the Admiralty Law Firm I used to work at in Houston. That ought to be fun to watch.
That's going to be great. Thank you very much for doing your Christmas shopping at my online store. And
yes, great stuff. You have great stuff, man. Better than Yosemite Sam's website.
I'm a big fan of Yosemite Sam. Now, you're crossing the line there, boy. You're crossing the line there. Anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, my question, you seem to know a lot about Jewish history and so forth, and I'm in a discussion with someone about that. I was wondering if you could explain about Khazar tribes and the history of their conversion to Judaism and so forth.
Well, that's Khazars, and there was a land called Khazaria, that was up where the Caucasus Mountains are, where Russian Georgia is now. And it was a kingdom. In about 800 A.D., they found themselves caught between the Christian armies coming in from the north and the armies of Islam coming in from the south. And the Khazars were traders. It was a trading empire, and they wanted to do business to both. Now, the Christians and the Muslims would not trade with each other over their religious dispute, but they would trade with the Khazars. And by staying in the middle, by being the middlemen, the Khazar Empire became very, very wealthy, trading in both directions. In order to resist conversion by one side or the other, the king of Khazaria declared Judaism the state religion, so that neither side had a religious advantage operating inside the nation. They imported a bunch of rabbis, and they said, everybody, you're now all Jewish, and here you go. And the plan worked for about 100 years. And then Khazaria collapsed and was conquered, and the descendants of those converted Khazar Jews migrated north into Russia and westward into Europe. And that is where the Ashkenazi, Russian and European Jews came from. They're not actually descended from the biblical Hebrews. But they grew up with the religious teaching of, Moses and we're the chosen people, and probably most of them actually genuinely believed that they were somehow genetically connected to the biblical Hebrews, this being in the days before DNA or genealogy or genetics had come along. But genetic testing today is basically showing that's true. The Ashkenazi, there's a smidgen of genuine Hebrew, Palestinian DNA in them, but it's mostly this European. And by the way, that's why they've got that pale skin. They don't even look like they're Middle Eastern. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Malcolm. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as we mentioned the other day, we're seeing a stellar performance by Senator Dianne Feinstein and Representative Mike Rogers in the Senate and House Intelligence Committees trying to revive the specter of terrorism. They're coming to get you. And what they're doing is they are seeing a rising tide of anger among the American people and among governments around the world over the revelation that the NSA is spying on absolutely everything they can. All of this a complete violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which says that before the government can peek in your windows, listen to your phone calls, read your emails, any of that, they must have evidence that a crime is actually being committed, supported by oath or affirmation. In other words, somebody has to see you doing something wrong. Then they go to the government and say, I think Mike over there is tap dancing barefoot on shag carpeting in defiance of the floor covering legislation, or whatever it's going to be. Then they can peek through the window and see if I'm tap dancing barefoot on shag carpeting, which I'm not. That's what the Fourth Amendment is designed to prevent, because during colonial times, when we were under British rule, the British soldiers would just walk into homes unannounced to make sure you weren't doing anything really bad, and that upset a lot of people, especially those caught in compromising situations, which may not have been illegal, but were embarrassing. And the American people are very angry about it, because so far with all this spying on us all, the NSA has not actually caught any significant criminals. They haven't caught any terrorists. They certainly did not act to stop the Boston Marathon bombing. They haven't caught all of these Wall Street inside traders or scammers that are going on. And we proved with our 4 NSA code challenges that real criminals and real terrorists are going to be able to secure their communications against the NSA for however long it takes to carry out their nefarious activity. And we know from past scandals, like the Seattle Apex scandal, that this government has no reservations at all about stealing your personal business or private secrets for their own benefit. I've lost count of how many government agents who heard information on wiretaps who then went out and did insider stock trading with it. And for every one that was actually caught and wrist slapped, there's probably another 500 got away with it. This government cannot be trusted with your private data. Whether it's your new idea for a product, your screenplay or book in progress, photos of your significant other in compromising positions or your Aunt Mary's top secret chocolate chip cookie recipe. It's none of the government's business, and the American people are getting very angry. And the only defense that Feinstein and Rogers have to try and keep this NSA system going a little bit longer is to wave terrorists at you. The terrorists will get you if you don't let us watch you when you're showering with your wife. And they're not getting a lot of traction. Now, whether they're desperate enough to try some kind of another false flag attack, who knows? But remember, a new false flag terror attack is going to backfire on them. Because the moment there's a loud bang anywhere, the American people are going to say, see, this NSA spying stuff didn't work at all, did it? Shut it all down. We need to spend our money on our roads, our schools, our hospitals, on the hungry and the homeless. Huge amounts of money were spent on this spy system to spy on the globe. It's alienated and isolated the United States from every other nation that wasn't actually part of the spy network and its take. The U.S. is taking all the information they're collecting on you, and they're just giving it to Israel. No filters, which means Israel is getting personal, private information gleaned not just from you and I and the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker, but our representatives, our senators, our heads of corporations. Israel's getting it all. There are no filters on that sharing of data. Now, speaking of Israel, somebody sent me this very bizarre article that's over at the official website of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. This is the organization that was formed in the wake of this Leo Frank, Mary Fagan murder trial, where Leo Frank was convicted of murdering Mary Fagan. The governor pardoned him. Frank was then lynched, and the ADL was formed to make sure that people of that particular religion were not defamed anymore by the media. The goal was to take control of the media so that certain stories were never made public that would embarrass that particular group of people. That's the origin of the ADL. Well, the ADL has this guide they've issued, a militia watchdog law enforcement advisory, which I linked to whatreallyhappened.com, not because there's anything of any real value in it, but because it's a textbook case of propaganda demonizing the Patriot movement. Ostensibly, this is a guide for how law enforcement should approach anybody suspected of being in the Patriot movement. And the portrayal of the Patriot in this article is one of the most outrageous, provocative stereotypes you could imagine, where the person portrayed in the article is just obviously he's a threat and he's hostile, and the advice is the police should always approach anybody in the Patriot movement on guard, that anybody in the Patriot movement is a threat that is going to turn and kill you if you dare let down your guard. And this kind of proselytizing of our police by the ADL and its allied bodies is one of the reasons the police are getting so out of control in this country. As Israel firms up its grip or tries to reestablish its grip over the United States society, the police are treating ordinary Americans the way the IDF treats the Palestinians. That is by design. And this article at the ADL website proves it. It's there to justify a militant approach by the police against the American people. What's the net result? Well, since 9/11, 8 times as many Americans have been wrongfully killed by the police departments of this country than have died in all the acts of terrorism, and that's including 9/11 itself, which is the big chunk. 8 times. There was a story last September where apparently this 84-year-old war veteran just touched a police officer who immediately turned around, grabbed him, put him in a headlock, and broke his neck. And the ADL is encouraging the police to behave this way against you, the American people, whose taxes, after all, are paying the salaries of the police department. And the ADL, which does not pay the salaries of the police department, is out there saying, you police, you got to beat up on the American people. Don't take a chance. Just brutalize them because, hey, that works so well in Israel. We're going to grab a phone call here. Edward in Michigan. Aloha. Edward, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. just curious about the Extendivite. If you've continued taking it, I'm considering giving it a try, and what your results were.
I take it. My wife takes it, and it's hard to say that. I mean, my overall health is improving. I've been on this huge weight loss program. My wife and I are both getting a lot more exercise, and I'm certainly feeling better these days than I did, for example, a year and a half, 2 years ago. But because I'm doing so many things to work on my health, I can't honestly say it's because of the Extendivite. I certainly have seen no negative effects from it, and the little bit of valerian that's in there does help me calm down and relax a little bit. So at this point, I wish I could stand up there and say, yes, this is a wonderful product. It certainly seems to be. My gut level is telling me it is, but again, because I'm doing so many other things at the same time, there's too many uncontrolled variables. So it's not scientific for me to say that. But I would say I think it's working for me. Give it a try. What have you got to lose?
Yeah, absolutely. I figure go for it for like 6 months or so and see how it works for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not going to hurt you. It's definitely not going to hurt you. I mean, it really is. It's certainly not as dangerous for you as all those synthetic chemicals coming out of big pharma right now. It's basically hawthorn, garlic. We know how good garlic is. I mean, there's a long historical tradition for garlic as a blood purifier, valerian root tranquilizer, cayenne, which is a vasodilator, bilberry, ginkgo biloba, milk thistle. It's all good stuff. It's all good stuff. And certainly for the guy who... Oh, we got to take a break. I'm sorry to cut you off there. We'll be back after Phyllis Shapley and these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 3. And Dan the Man is now sitting in our control room, and he'll be answering the phone when you call into 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. I want to skip on down my talking points. There was a bunch of stuff going on. We'll probably push some of it into tomorrow. But I want to get on to the Detroit bankruptcy because I think it's a very serious situation where the judge has now cleared the path for the Detroit bankruptcy, and the axe is falling very heavily on the pensioners. Those who worked for the city of Detroit their entire life, paid into a pension fund. Detroit was supposed to pay into a pension fund. The pension fund is now empty. And the judge for the bankruptcy of Detroit is saying, yeah, you can just let these people go. It's their problem. It's not your problem. And the reason pension funds are in trouble all across America goes back to 2008 and the mortgage-backed security fraud when Wall Street's pet ratings agencies gave AAA ratings to those bundled mortgage investment vehicles. And under U.S. law, pension funds or any funds that are dealing with people who are retired, they're too old to pick up and start over again to build a second retirement. So they're in kind of a hard place. So pension funds by law may only invest in AAA rated securities. And Wall Street's pet rating agencies, with the exception of Egan-Jones, came out and said, oh, yeah, these mortgage bundles, they're great. They're AAA. The real estate market's always going to go up, and that makes these things secure. Even though a lot of people already knew there was fraud going on there. Same mortgage was getting pledged to multiple bundles. That's criminal felony fraud. Nobody went to jail for. And when the whole mortgage-backed security fraud exploded or imploded or collapsed or whatever you want to call it, pension funds across America were emptied. And unfortunately for those pension funds under the control of state and local governments, those politicians in those state and local governments lack the gonadal tissue to stand up and point the finger of blame where it really goes. And we have seen this in state after state and city after city where the solution is to say, yeah, sorry, the money's gone. It's your problem. I got nothing to do with it. And so the Detroit bankruptcy, it's all those workers who worked for the city their entire lifetime, and they had an agreement, a contract with the city to cover their retirement, and now it's just gone. And that is now considered acceptable behavior. And it isn't. It really isn't. Because there is enough money in this country for everybody to be taken care of comfortably. But not when it's all piled up in these huge obelisks, ziggurats, towering over Wall Street in Washington, D.C. And the U.S. government doesn't really need all the money. They're screaming they got to take money from you. It's just a way of keeping you under control. There's a huge brouhaha brewing over the fate of the USS Forrestal. This is the aircraft carrier made famous by John McCain, which was sold for scrap for 1 penny. Now, I'm sure you will understand, looking at this aircraft carrier, there is a fortune in scrap metal sitting there. And the ship is going to be towed from Philadelphia, where it's berthed, down to Brownsville, Texas, where they're going to take it apart and sell it for scrap. This is a sweetheart deal for somebody. Because that carrier, a wise and prudent government, would have sold it for its scrap value, less towing cost, less a margin for the person doing the scrapping to make a profit. They just gave it away. And you paid for all of that. All over the world, we're beginning to see this growing trend among the bankers to find a way to justify drastic changes in the relationship between banks and their customers. And we've already been talking about how Yellen is trying to deal with the money hoarders, meaning you and your savings account, not the people on Wall Street, by allowing banks to now charge you a fee for storing your money in a savings account. When I was a kid and people were being encouraged to save for a rainy day, you'd put your money in a savings account, the bank would use that money to loan out. They would get interest on the loan, they would share that interest with you, and your money in the savings account would grow. That was the way the model was supposed to be. Of course, these days we know the banks are just loaning out money that's created out of thin air. And they don't really need the savings accounts anymore. So now they're talking about charging you a fee for bothering them with your accumulated cash. And Yellen wants people who actually have a savings account. Oh, if we charge them a fee for keeping a savings account, they'll take that money and they'll spend it into circulation, and that will help the economy. No, it won't. These people are savers. They'll take their money out of the savings account, they'll put it into silver and gold, and they'll bury it in a mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation. That's what's going to happen. This policy's not going to work. Now, at the recent Future of Banking in Europe conference, where all the money junkies got together to do their money junkie thing, they're openly talking about future bail-ins and confiscation of deposits. These people are not bankers, they're bank robbers. And it's easy for them because they own the bank. And what started in Cyprus, remember back when Cyprus got its haircut or its scalping or its castration, whatever you want to call it, and they were saying, oh, it's a one-time only emergency move. It's being discussed as a policy where when a bank gets itself into trouble, they will be allowed to dip into the savings accounts of their customers to cover their losses. Good reason to get your money out of the bank right now and bury it in a mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation. I don't think Yellen has much to worry about. Over at the Bank of England, they're reporting the biggest drop in savings for the last 40 years. People are having to dip into their savings accounts just to stay alive. And charging for savings accounts and the threat of bail-ins is only going to make it worse. So they'll change the rules for fractional reserve banking and say, you don't need to worry about depositor money. We'll figure up your reserve margin some other way. Now, needless to say, we've already been talking about this. The Christmas shopping season is off to a horrible start. Yes, there were crowds at the mall, and they were all looking. Hardly anybody was buying. Apparently 13% below what they were hoping it was going to be, or the projections were going to be. And now everybody's scrambling for an excuse. What's going on here? And we're seeing this article over here at RINF.com. Drop in holiday sales reflects U.S. social crisis. It isn't a social crisis. It's an economic one. Christmas, contrary to the marketing coming from the retailers, it's not a necessity. There is no need to go out and buy Christmas presents for your friends and family. It's nice, it's traditional, but it's not essential to survival. And a huge percentage of America are operating on survival level right now. I'm not expecting this is going to be a great Christmas season. We haven't had a really good, powerful retail Christmas season, I think, for 7 years now. And a lot of retail companies, they rely on that holiday shopping season to get them into the black. That's why it's called Black Friday. And come January, when it's all over, we will see retail companies that were operating in the red for the entire year and they couldn't get into the black over Christmas, they'll go out of business. We've lost so many retailers over the last several years. Because for an economy to work takes more than corporations luring money out of the population or taking money out of the population and the government taxing it out of you or ordering you to spend money on things like Obamacare and wireless headsets and all the rest of that stuff they tell you got to buy. Somebody somewhere in control, in authority, has to so organize the economy that the people can transform their labor into adequate wealth to feed that pyramid system. And that's where this entire United States government, Wall Street system has failed. They weren't looking at the foundation. They were too dazzled by living at the peak of the pyramid. Going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here. Dan in Louisiana. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike.
Aloha.
Hey, man. Yeah. Big shout out to Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines out there at K-Bay. Fortes, Fortuna, Juvat. Fortune favors the bold. That's Oahu. You on Oahu, right?
Yes, I am.
Cool. That's what's up. Yeah, man, you're spot on with your analysis of the banking system. The problem is they've woven such a fantastic, comfortable life for us that they want to maintain the status quo, and they do that through their different bureaucracies and everything else.
Well, yes, that's exactly what happens, and they're willing to invest part of their fortune to maintain this illusion, this matrix around us that we've got it good and everybody else has got it worse, and we shouldn't complain and we shouldn't fight back. But these days, and it really began to accelerate after the revelation that Saddam Hussein really did not have nuclear weapons. The American people are very skeptical. They're not trusting of the government or the corporate media. They're looking for reasons not to trust the official story. And once you start looking, you find them.
Yep. That's absolutely right. False flag after false flag happened. USS Liberty, everything else. It's time to bring our troops home. We would see an economic boom if we brought our troops home. They would spend their money at bars and the clubs and the stadiums here to enjoy our pro sports and everything else. So that's my solution. That's my short-term solution to give us an economic boom and carrying on forward into 2014 into 2016.
Well, it's a nice ideal, and in general terms, definitely would work. But there's a few steps you have to go through transitioning a wartime economy to a peacetime economy. What is really most essential is we just work to revive our manufacturing in this country, because that is the means by which Americans can earn decent wages and salaries, building products that will sell to other countries. And that we really started losing. We started letting it go 30 years ago. And people were saying at the time, this is a mistake, and the government said, we don't need to worry, we'll have the service economy, which was this theory that we could make the nation prosperous by doing each other's laundry for a fee, and all it really did was open up additional opportunities for taxation, but it greatly reduced new wealth coming into the country from outside, and that's when we really began to see these $1.5 billion a day trade imbalances.
Yep, and you look around the corner and you see these family dollars popping up. That's the foreign banking takeover. They just keep propping up stuff in our community, corporate buildings. It's a foreign corporate banking takeover, and the only way out of it is I know you were saying that we shouldn't have a revolution, but we need a revolution.
Well, we're going to have to disagree on that one, and I also disagree that it's foreign banks that are the problem. It is the banking system as a whole. It's a systemic problem having to do with the particular economic model that we follow, which is that all commerce and trade is carried out using banknotes borrowed at interest from that private central bank. It's the very system of banking we fought a revolution to be free of. And again, I'm not advocating for a revolution, but when it all comes crashing down, as it inevitably must, because it's a pyramid scheme, We, the American people, need to be ready to stand up and say, we're forming a new country for ourselves. No more private central banking, no more private central banking, no more private central banking.
Yep. I agree with you. You know what? You got this clique of people on this spiraling fractional reserve interest rate that is so incredibly padded, while the regular people around here only get like 0.001 interest on their savings account.
And they're going to lose that too, because now the banks are going to start charging a fee for holding your money. So you'll be encouraged to put that money back out in circulation, and they won't. They'll take it home, they'll put it into silver and gold, and they'll hide it, and that's exactly what they should be doing.
Yep, and they got silver and gold pawn shops all over this town, just squeaking away every last little bit of silver and gold that we have. There ain't no gold in Fort Knox no more.
Yeah. No, we got the same thing out here. I remember when I was a kid, pawn shops were a lot like the one that you see on that reality show Pawn Stars, where there's all kinds of cool things in there. But out here on the island of Oahu, all the pawn shops are buying is gold and silver. They're not interested in buying anything else. It's just a gold and silver collection place. We've got kiosks in the shopping mall where you can take your gold in, and they'll give you ink and paper for it that you will use to go and buy something as a Christmas present that's probably not going to last 2 days past the end of the warranty period.
Yep. America has to be the opposite of what we are, consumer nation.
Absolutely. And the consumerism is driven by the money junkies seeking to acquire more of our wealth. And again, fundamentally, I don't have a problem with people who want to make a lot of money. There's a good way to do it, like Steve Jobs or George Lucas or Steven Spielberg, or people who make good products or good movies that we voluntarily give our money for. That's capitalism. But when you have a bunch of bankers who game the system and corrupt the government so that wealth automatically flows to them and they put nothing back into society, that's a problem. That's fascism. And that's what we have to oppose.
Yes, and I totally agree with the event of 9/11, that unfortunate event that went down. They're the bankers are gonna plan more of those, and they're gonna be bigger, and they're gonna all happen at one time. It's gonna be real ugly.
Yeah, they're desperate now to get this next war going. They're trying to solve this mess with another world war like they did the last two times. They're still trying to find a way to get the Syria war back on track. They're still trying to find a way to get the war in Iran going. And ultimately, the U.S. is going to wind up at war with China to stop the yuan's encroachment on the dollar as the global trade and reserve currency. In fact, by the way, the yuan just passed the euro in international use. The yuan is now the second most used currency on planet Earth, and it's closing in on the dollar. And that's why we're seeing all this saber rattling over in the Western Pacific. We've got to stop the yuan. It's a mortal threat to the American dollar. So forth and so on. All right. Jim in Georgia, what's on your mind?
Hello, Mike, and I missed you for a while there, buddy.
No, I was around, just doing what I do.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm glad you did. I had to call about, when you were talking about pawn shops. I watched that Hollywood on, and people are spending $100,000 on bracelets and artwork and all that kind of stuff. And then you see Detroit pawn, and people are pawning their TVs, their PlayStations, standing in line 2 hours long to pay on their pawns. It's a shame,
Mm-hmm.
Money is all in one side,
Yeah, it is. It is. If you're on the inside of the system, it's just ink and paper, and for the rest of us, it controls our lives. Our slave chains are made of paper, and that paper is the Federal Reserve note.
Right. Mike, well, I'd like to wish you happy holidays and Merry Christmas, and people send you $1 or $10 or $20 to help keep this station on the air. Thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for that very kind thought, because, we're a little tight, and we can use all the help that we can get. Ralph in California, Ralph in California, you're going to have to go quick. We're coming up on a commercial.
Yeah, Mike, welcome back.
Thank you.
Good to hear you. Hey, you were talking about the magazine laws, or the limits, or they were going to change it to a 5-round round limit on the magazine in another state. Is that correct?
That's in New York, yes.
Okay, over here in California, we're allowed 10.
Yes.
Now, you brought up, is it the Miller Law or Miller Act?
It's United States versus Miller was a United States Supreme Court decision which stated that the Second Amendment reserves to the American people those weapons carried by the uniformed military. And it wasn't what they set out to rule, but the case had to do with a sawed-off shotgun. We've got to take a break for commercials. Ralph, don't go away. When we come back, I'm going to talk about United States versus Miller and the Second Amendment. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Ralph in California about limits on magazines, limits on various weapons, and specifically referring to a decision rendered by the United States Supreme Court in a case called United States versus Miller. And the case involved Miller was arrested with a sawed-off shotgun, which is illegal pretty much everywhere in the country. Exactly how short the barrel has to be considered sawed-off varies from place to place to place. That's what happened at that whole Randy Weaver situation where the undercover FBI informant asked him to cut off the shotgun just a quarter of an inch inside the legal limit to set him up, to get him to become a spy for the FBI, and it led to the whole Ruby Ridge situation. Miller argued that the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America that says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed meant that any laws regarding the length of a shotgun barrel are unconstitutional and that he should be acquitted. The Supreme Court upheld his conviction and came back and said that because of the inclusion of words about defense of a free state, security of a free state, and militia, that the Second Amendment, what the Second Amendment guaranteed to the American people was to keep and bear arms equal to those held by the uniformed services, and because the uniformed services of the United States were not using sawed-off shotguns at the time, they became popular in Vietnam, but at the time, that the conviction was upheld. And I don't think they realized that they had opened a huge can of worms, because under that Miller decision, you and I should be able to go buy an M16 with the triple fire select button, and there should be no more limits on our magazine capacity than there are on the National Guard, the police, and the Army and the Navy, and so forth. Now, from a point of view of enforcement, of course, the Miller decision is pretty much conveniently ignored, but that's basically where that comes from. Now, on a common sense point of view, because I think anybody who's talking about gun rights, we need to stay away from this idea of government oppression and the need to defeat government tyranny, and just to take what I call the common sense approach to gun freedom, which is that we, the people of the United States of America, have a legitimate and a very real need and a right to keep and bear arms equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals. And we know the criminals are getting fully automatic weapons because of Fast and Furious. We know the police rarely, if ever, arrive in time to thwart a crime in progress. They always show up afterwards. They pose with the dead bodies, you know, in their nice shiny uniforms for the press cameras, but they're not there in time to actually stop the crime in progress. Who's there when the crime is being committed? The criminal and the victim. And the victim should have the necessary armament to thwart the crime. And every community that has, gun freedom, where the citizens are allowed to keep, bear, and even carry guns, crime is lower than in those parts of the country where the law-abiding citizen has been disarmed. That is, without exception, all around the globe, common sense. And so I'm very much opposed to limits on the capacity of magazines or any other limits. The only reason the government is pushing that issue is to keep the armed American citizens militarily inferior to the government troops in the event of a conflict, which I am hoping fervently we can avoid. But that's why they're pushing for all this limits on assault rifles and limits on magazine capacity, is to keep the armed American people, which is 80% of the population, militarily inferior to the government's stormtroopers. Okay, Ralph?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, then since I'm in California, we're limited to 10 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
If I could bring that in and say, well, wait a minute. Now, with that decision, I can use that as an argument to say now I'm allowed to have a 30-round mag.
In theory, you could, but the judges are not going to be thinking the letter of the law and the Constitution. They're going to be thinking that they're on the side of the government, and they're all keenly aware that the government is driving us towards a confrontation with the people. And so, again, on a practical level of what's actually being enforced by the courts and the police, they're going to go along with these laws even though they're unconstitutional. And their argument is it's the law, and until somebody says it's unconstitutional, you have to go along with it. That, too, is also a lie, because the United States Supreme Court, again, also ruled in Marbury versus Madison that laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. So if the government passes a law saying, you know, we can peek into your windows, even though it violates the Fourth Amendment, and you're going to have to wait till the Supreme Court says it's wrong. No, you don't. No, you don't. Under the Marbury versus Madison decision, if you know that law is repugnant to the Constitution, you are not bound by it. Now, of course, the police will take a different approach, and so will the judges. So it's a theoretical exercise, but from a pragmatic and practical level, the government, they're going to beat you up until you do what they want you to do.
Okay.
Okay?
Well, thanks very much.
All righty, and we're going to switch over to Obi in Colorado. Obi, thank you very much for waiting all this time, and what's on your mind today?
I have a quick point to make with you about who actually runs the world, and I'll preface it by saying, who are the majority shareholders of the Federal Reserve and the International Monetary Fund? And those people, which are the Warburgs, the Schiffs, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, they're who are calling the shots. They're who actually runs the world.
Well,
and
you're correct up to a point. Until you realize that the world's financial system does function as a machine, and it operates with a great deal of autonomy, and those people who are on the inside, they have to go along with that process. If there's anybody inside one of those families who stood up and said, really, this is wrong and it's destructive, they're going to be replaced. Others will come in and say they're crazy, kick them out. And really, we've allowed the money power, the power of the money system itself to become so great, nobody can stand up to it, not even the bankers ostensibly in control of it.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you there, because the Rothschilds are driving it all. And they purposely collapsed things after the Battle of Waterloo in England so that they could buy up everything there for pennies on the dollar, or pennies on the pound, as it were.
Yes.
And they're doing the same thing to everything now. And they're doing all this on purpose. They've got their finger on everything, and they're controlling the price of gold. They're controlling everything because they want it to collapse so they can buy everything up for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, that's absolutely been done, and we're seeing the same thing just in the housing market, where people in 2008 were getting these $2-3 million mortgages on these properties, and they're hideously in debt to the bank. Then the real estate market crashes, the homes are foreclosed, and they're sold back to the real estate investors, for $500,000 or so they can start the process all over again with the next generation.
Right, and put the next generation into debt slavery. They literally want a return to the feudal lord system.
Oh, that's absolutely true. We're seeing a return to serfdom. And feudalism, if you really think about it, feudalism and fascism are very, very much the same mindset.
Yeah, I agree with that. Other than that, I'd like to say welcome back. I'm glad you're back.
Well, glad to be here.
And other than that, have a good day, and I'll let you go.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Dan is sitting in our control room ready to answer the phone. We're coming up on the top of the show here. So let's see. Going back, I want to skip on back to some of the talking points. We're seeing protests all over the world, and it's not getting a lot of coverage here in the United States because they don't want you American serfs to get these uppity ideas that you could actually stand up and complain here. But apparently both Spain and Japan are moving to criminalize protests. And we understand that the right for a people to stand up to its government and demand redress of grievances is a fundamental human right. It doesn't just apply to Americans because of the First Amendment. It is recognized as a right of all people to talk to their government and say what you're doing isn't working. And certainly in the case of Spain, which is very much enslaved to the European Central Bank, and the people of Spain are feeling those financial predations, the same as the people in Greece, the same as the people in Cyprus, same as people in Italy and France and the rest of it. They're starting to complain. The government of Spain's answer is you're not allowed to protest anymore. Just stay in your homes, stay in your jobs, go from home to work and back to home again, and We don't want to hear from you again. In Japan, it's partly motivated by the growing awareness of the Japanese people that the government has been a little bit less than honest and forthcoming about the contamination coming out of Fukushima. And this awareness that the true scale of the problem has been sort of papered over for all this time since the disaster happened. The Japanese people are protesting. Japan was going to shut down all their nuclear power plants. Now lobbyists have come in and said, no, they're safe. Put them back online. You need to have nuclear power. The Japanese people are starting to protest over the fact that their government was lying to them about what was going on. Now Japan is moving to criminalize protests. These countries that supposedly represented bastions of freedom and democracy are turning into dictatorships before our very eyes. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And somebody just sent in a story. We were talking about this yesterday, the so-called knockout game where the whole point of the game, and apparently it was inspired by the movie Fight Club. Apparently it's taken on a racial overtone with the so-called polar bear hunting. And I said, first of all, these kids playing the game, it's assault and battery. They should be going to jail. And I said, sooner or later, somebody's going to get hurt. And we later updated with a story about two kids who attacked somebody in September. And they were both stabbed, one of them fatally. Now we're getting a report that apparently some kid tried to play knockout with a concealed carry holder and wound up shot. And the message here is, yeah, it looks cool in the movie, but that is a movie. It's not the real world. I worked in the motion picture industry for a lot of years. And mostly I had fun. But it's all make-believe. It's fairy tales. Nothing you see on that screen is real. We know the reality shows aren't even real. On TV, TV's being flooded with them. Apparently CNN is now going away from news into entertainment, so we're going to get reality shows all over CNN now. But if you see it in Fight Club, or you see it in Fast and Furious, or you see it whatever, however it looks, it's not real. It's special effects, it's visual effects, it's highly trained stunt people with special equipment. Please keep that line between the fantasy world that corporate media throws at you and what life is really all about. It's a dumb thing for these kids to be doing, and apparently some of them are getting killed doing it. And that is an absolute tragedy that should not be happening. All righty. We are getting word that Israel, not having been content with wrecking factories all across Asia, Russia, and into Japan with the first Stuxnet, have developed a new version, a super Stuxnet, targeting Iran's nuclear program to break down the centrifuges or trigger a meltdown or whatever else it's supposed to do, so that what happened by accident at Chernobyl and Fukushima is done deliberately to the people of Iran, with a completely reckless disregard for what might happen if this new super Stuxnet breaks into the wild like its predecessor and races all around the world, infecting similar systems. Because certainly in the case of the first Stuxnet, it targeted these Siemens industrial controllers, which are a standard item in factories around the world. It's a big part of Siemens' business. They're a standard computer interface between your computer's control system and the actual factory operations. They operate valves, they throw switches, they pull levers, whatever needs to be done to get the computer to control the factory. These Siemens controllers do it. Stuxnet targeted them. And we know that when Fukushima had its crisis, the emergency systems, which included Siemens controllers, did not operate the way they were supposed to. And they still have not identified why they did not. By this time, whatever was in the non-volatile memory of the Siemens controllers is probably gone. But it would have been, I think, educational to grab one of those units out there and see if Stuxnet had actually been in the memory, because we do know Stuxnet had infected computers all around the Fukushima power station before the disaster happened. So it's a good bet that it was in there. And you have to wonder about the callousness of anybody who would unleash a weapon so demonstrably capable of breaking out and causing all kinds of unintended damage to innocent people just to get the one person they want to get. It's a very, very dangerous mindset here. Now, getting back to the growing pressure of war and the apparent desire by the United States to eventually somehow bring about war with China to stop the UN's march on the dollar as the global trade and reserve currency. The yuan is now in number 2 place. They just passed the euro. And we've been talking about how America's military might is built around these hideously expensive weapons that are really botch-ups. The Littoral Combat Stealth Ship, which isn't stealthy. The F-22 still asphyxiating its pilots. F-35 can't land on the carrier, can't fly in the rain or fog. All of these things, very expensive, all very high-tech, all very fragile and delicate, very difficult to work. Again, if you've never seen it, there's a movie called The Pentagon Wars. It's based on a true story of the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, and it shows how this whole weapons development program in the United States, it's all about the money and promotion and growing fat, rich, and lazy and happy off the backs of the American taxpayer, and produces weapons that are really not very effective. I remember the huge scandal over the fight between the M14 and the M16, and all the brass wanted the M14 because they owned stock in the company producing it, and they tried to rig the tests of the M16 so it would fail, and they got a lot of people killed. But that's okay, I've got stock over here, we've got to look after the stock. And hey, people get killed in combat and war, that's just what they're there for. And we're talking about other countries that are not spending anywhere near as much money as the United States, but they spend it wisely and smartly. We were talking yesterday about the new Russian submarine, diesel-electric boat. The lead boat just rolled out there. It is so quiet, even the U.S. Navy is saying it's a black hole in the water, and they don't know how they're going to be able to find it, even with their new super-powerful whale-killing Autex sonar. And following up on that, apparently the Russians have just released a new fire-and-forget missile for their fighter planes that is being described as an absolute killer, impossible to evade. The U.S. spends all this money on all these big, huge ships with all the stealth and defense, and the Russians are developing these multi-Mach maneuverable sea skimmer missiles. I'll give you a good example. Look how much money the U.S. government has put into the ballistic missile defense system. Emphasis on the word ballistic, which means your incoming target is presumed to be following a parabolic course from point of launch to point of impact. That's what ballistic means. It's from the old medieval weapon, the ballista. Billions of dollars spent on a ballistic missile defense system. The Russians spent a tiny, tiny fraction of that same money to make their warheads non-ballistic. They bob, they weave, they corkscrew, they dipsy-doodle. They just weave back and forth, which makes ballistic interception impossible. So just because the United States has thrown more of your money into that bonfire of defense spending doesn't guarantee the outcome of a future war. And that's why we should be very concerned about this rush to pick a fight with everybody on the planet who doesn't like private central banking. Let's see, over in Britain they spent a huge amount of taxpayer money on what they call the flagship Back to Work program. And they got a grand total of 720 people back to work for all this money, and it's entirely possible those 720 probably would have found work anyway without the program. That's one of the reasons the economy isn't such terrible. The government takes all your money away and says, we'll take care of this for you. They do a botch-up job of it and spend a fortune to do something that really could have been accomplished for much less money. Obamacare's website being a perfectly good example of that. Now, you remember that wonderful video from HBO's The Newsroom, America's not the greatest nation on earth anymore, and he goes down the list of all the ways where the U.S. isn't number one, and particularly in education. Well, apparently the PISA 2012 rankings are out. The U.S. now ranks 36th in the world for educational quality, declining 10 points just in the time since The Newsroom aired that episode. The only thing that we scored decently on was reading, but on math and all the other areas of measurement, major decline, because our public education system isn't about education anymore. It's about indoctrination. We'll tell you what to believe. Don't think, just believe, and all will be well. And it isn't. There's the music. It's time for us to get out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. Please support Republic Broadcasting. Go over to the republicbroadcasting.org website. Little donate button up there. We do need your help to keep moving forward and grow our audience and our reach. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.